Welcome to my presentation on long-run economic growth and convergence. First of all, let me define what the economic growth and convergence are. Economic growth is sustained long-term increase in the total output of goods and services within a country's economy, typically represented by a rise in GDP. Convergence is the process of poor countries catching up to rich countries by growing faster and narrowing the income gap. Unconditional convergence assumed that countries with lower GDP per capita or those with initial lower GDP growth will accelerate their growth rates and close the income gap with richer countries, regardless of other economic conditions. Conditional convergence, on the other hand, considered that other economic indicators such as employment rate, investment, and so on may affect the convergence process. To test this hypothesis, I use a variety of economic indicators from the World Bank's website, covering the period from 1960 to 2020, and I compiled and organized them in a format suitable for regression analysis. As you can see, the mean GDP in 2020 was 16,895, but the median was only 6,012, indicating a skewed distribution with some outliers. Similarly, the mean inflation rate from 1990 to 2020 was 23.4, but the standard deviation was 102, suggesting a high degree of volatility and instability. To compare the rich countries and poor countries, I divided them based on their GDP per capita in 1990. The rich country had a GDP per capita above the median of 1,592, while the poor country had a GDP per capita below. Let's talk about the result of regression analysis. As you can see, the coefficient of initial GDP per capita is negative and significant in both models, suggesting that the country with lower initial GDP per capita and tend to grow faster than countries with higher initial GDP per capita, supporting the idea of unconditional convergence. However, when other variables are added, the coefficients become smaller and lesser significant, implying that other factors may influence the convergence process. For example, population growth, capital formation, education, and ICT service export have positive and significant effects on GDP per capita growth, while inflation and poverty have negative and significant effects. This result indicated that the conditional convergence may be more realistic than unconditional convergence. In this session, I selected two countries from each group, the United States and Japan for the rich group, and China and India for the poor group. The result shows that the United States and Japan had higher GDP per capita than China and India throughout the period, but their growth rates were lower and more stable. China and India, on the other hand, had lower GDP per capita than the US and Japan, but their growth rates were higher and more volatile. This suggested some evidence of convergence between the two groups of countries, as China and India narrowed the income gap with the United States and Japan over time. Now, let me summarize the key findings and the implication of the study. There is some evidence of unconditional convergence between rich and poor countries, as countries with lower initial GDP per capita tend to grow faster than countries with higher initial GDP per capita. However, unconditional convergence is not sufficient to explain the growth patterns of countries, as other economic indicators such as population growth, capital formation, education, inflation, ICT service export, and poverty also affect the convergence process. Conditional convergence may be more realistic than unconditional one, as it takes into account the difference in economic conditions and policy among countries. The case study of said country illustrates how historical and economic issues can influence their growth performance and convergence or divergence. Moreover, there are some implications of the study. Convergence is not inevitable or automatic, but depends on various factors that can enhance or hinder economic growth and development. Poor country can catch up to rich country by adopting sound economic policy and institutions that promote investment, education, innovation, and social welfare. Rich country can also maintain their economic advantage by avoiding complaints and stagnation and by fostering competitiveness and resilience.
Hello everyone, my name is Aditya Gupta, and here I'm going to talk about the fiscal and monetary policy and stabilization policy. So, fiscal policy is basically the total spending done by a government in order to control the money and to keep a check on the economic stability of a country. So, there are basically two types of economic policy. First one is the expansionary fiscal policy. So, basically, when a government want to keep a check on how the economic stability works, it increases the total spending of the government in times of any recession or where when there is a low demand in any kind of product or services. So in contrast to that, it decreases the interest rate so as to stabilize the economic policy and the economic growth. The second one is the contractionary fiscal policy. So it basically refers to the decrease in the spending of the government while increasing the interest rate so as to stabilize the economic policy in terms of any inflation. So whenever there is a huge demand of any product or services, it decreases the supply of money while increasing the interest rate. The second one is the monetary policy. It's basically the policy in which the central bank keeps an check on all the supply and demand and interest rates of the country, which directly affects the investments, spending, borrowing, and decisions related to all the investment related queries. These are also of two types. The first one is the expansionary monetary policy. Here, in this kind of policy, the interest rates are lowered down and the money flow is increased so as to boost the economic growth. The second one is the contractionary monetary policy. It is the opposite of the expansionary one, and here the interest rates are increased while there is a decrease in the money supply in terms of any inflation going on in the economy. Next, I'm going to talk about how these policies really affect the macroeconomic stability. So these two policies, when combined together, has a deep impact on the country's economic stability, along with the macroeconomic stability. So to explain this, let's suppose the government increases the spending of the total money while lowering down the interest rate for any government policy or be it any project or be it any advancement it needs to be done. So this basically results in overall increase of investment and borrowing, which eventually leads to a better economic stability of the government. And on the contrary, on the opposite side of it, when the total spending done by the government is lowered down while increasing the interest rate, it automatically results in the reduction of the demand. For example, if as a government it keeps a check on the total spending, it lowers down the total spending. So ultimately there'll be less demand. More people would not be really easily going to buy things. So there'll be reduction in the demand, so which stabilizes the economic stability. Now, to conclude this, these two policies go hand in hand and they must be achieved by excellent knowledge so that all the policymakers should be able to understand the situation and respond accordingly in terms of inflation rate, demand, and supply for an economic growth. Next, I'm going to talk about the stabilization policies. So, the first part of our data analysis focused on two different sets of countries, which were the rich countries and the poor countries. So, rich countries included US, UK, Germany, France, and Japan. The poor countries included China, Indonesia, India, Thailand, and Philippines. And the bifurcation was done on the basis of the median income of GDP per capita in 1990. There were different factors which affected the growing economic and stability of a country. The first one was the liberalization of trade. So there are certain rules and regulations. For example, developed countries, means the rich countries, they followed the policies to lower the tax barriers to promote the free trade between the countries. The second one was the investment in training and education. So these developed countries, these rich countries, believed in the human capital development for any economic performances. So they believe that the human capital development should be really important so as uh, to leave a good impact on the economic performance. The third one was the regulations and supervisions of fashion. So there were certain rules and regulations which are really necessary for a country to stabilize in the banking system as well. So these developed countries, these rich countries, implemented such strategies in their banking system for proper functioning and by strengthening the regulations and keeping everything transparent. So everything in their banking system used to be transparent so as to perform a smooth functioning of the system. The next was the research and development. So there were, if there was some recent innovations or advancements, so these developed countries highly recommended them, and the government promoted those inventions, and they were really open for any new technology which they believed would eventually result in the economic development. So any new goods or services which they think that could be an example to boost an economic development, they really considered it. Uh, so these were all the things which I talked about: the fiscal policy, monetary policy, and their effect on macroeconomic stability and the stabilization policy. Thank you.
Hi everyone, my name is Singh Roha and my topic is economic shock and policy measures years between 1960 to 2022. Introduction. As in this part of analysis we have to consider the economic shock and the policy in many years like 1960 to 2020 that had any significant effect or provide an extensive discussion on the economic shock of years between 1960 to 2020. Okay, so I would like to consider these two countries, United States and China. In United States during 1961, after continuing the rise through December, the stock market in United States experienced a massive decline from June 1962, that is the S&P 500. This incident is known as S&P 500, experienced a 22.5% decline, whereas how the Dow Jones Industrial Average dropped nearly about 5.7% on May 28 in 1962 itself. On that was term is known as the flash crash of 1962 in the United States economic stock, whereas in China, in the economic stock of China country, there has been an upper middle income developing with a mixed socialist market economy in the market that incorporates industrial policies and has strategies 5-year planned, whereas China is the world's second largest economy by nominal GDP, which is simply behind the United States here. What are the social, economic, and political consequences of the economic shock? In United States, the economic system in US had cut capitalism in the economic system is the United States, and having a market economy and capitalism means that the people are not government, they are on their own. Yeah. China, whereas in China, is the world's largest economy in this country from the China began to open up and reform its economy in 1978. Quit DR GDP growth has averaged over the 9% per year, and it is more than 800 million people have lifted themselves out of poverty in China. This is a really huge number that 800 million people have lifted themselves from poverty. How effective policy measures are? Are the policy measures in place effective? First, in United States, unemployment rate shows fluctuations. That means these are fluctuating now, not constant, with notable increase during economic recession. This is a very bad thing for United States. In 2008, this was happening. The unemployment rate stood at 8 to 9% in the post-financial crisis of 2008 period. World Bank 2023, like other countries, US implanted various monetary and facial policies to manage economic stability. And in China, if policy measures the new economic policies of China that have to make it grow at a faster rate than the four modern stations are agriculture, industry, science, technology, and military. China focuses on these three things. These are the proposed by Premier Zhou Enlai in 1973. The economic policy of China covers a wide range of measures, which is the government's suit to manage their economy in China.
Hi everybody, my name is Dheeraj. So now I will be talking about sustainable development. Sustainable development refers to the setting up of policies and measures by the government that ensures development and the needs of the present are met without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs, along with protecting the environment for the long run. The two ways of attaining sustainable development are through social economic development and environmental development. Socially sustainable development in an economy focuses on the social well being of its country's people by improving living standards and ensuring access to necessities like education, healthcare, and transportation are met. Governments must also ensure on social equity and the inclusion of minorities, creating a powerful sense of community. A few ways to ensure social economic development are healthcare services by providing affordable and quality healthcare services like uh, primary healthcare, mental healthcare, and preventive healthcare to its people. Gender equality policies must be put in place to ensure that there is no discrimination among the genders. This makes sure that everyone has equal opportunities in various works and educational levels. Affordable housing. Access to affordable housing to match the demand of every income level must be met. This ensures that everyone has a safe housing. Community well-being. Fostering a community well-being and the health ensures economic development. This can be done through providing access to parks and recreational areas where people can relax and unwind. Sustainable environmental development in an economy is the balanced economic growth focusing on the long-term health of an economy, society, and the environment. It acknowledges the connection between these three factors and works to promote economic growth while reducing adverse effects on the environment and the future generations. A few ways to ensure environmental economic development are using renewable energy. Governments must shift to the use of renewable energy resources like the wind, air, and water energy as they produce less emissions and pollution in the environment. Conserving the biodiversity. To ensure long term sustainable environmental development, governments must preserve the ecology and the wildlife. Hence, by doing this, they ensure a proper sustained future. Resource efficiency and conservation. Utilization of resources effectively make sure that uh, uh, lesser pollution is emitted into the environment. This can be done through by recycling and reusing products. Innovation in green technology. Uh, Efforts must be put into place to develop and research greener technologies, which ensures safer transportation and lesser emission of carbon. Other ways to ensure sustainable development are through long-term sustainable development goals like the one proposed by the United Nations, which has a 10-year plan to ensure that countries follow and make sure for a sustainable future. And the other one is by settling trade disputes. By settling trade disputes and promoting fair trade, economies can ensure that they are sustainable for the future and have a developed economy. Hence, by implementing policies and measures as mentioned previously, governments can ensure a long-term sustainability that not only satisfies their current need but also protects the future generations along with the environment. Thank you.